Okay, let's talk about a new kind of battlefield. It's a place where there are no trenches, no physical front lines, but it's a place where wars are already being won and lost. It's a war fought with signals and code in a domain that's completely invisible to the naked eye, and it's totally reshaping modern conflict. We're going to dive right into the world of CEMA.
To really get a sense of the stakes here, just look at this number. In the conflict in Ukraine, it's estimated that a whopping 75% of drones aren't shot down with missiles. Nope, they're taken down by electronic warfare. Their signals get jammed, their GPS gets tricked, and they literally just fall out of the sky. This isn't some sci-fi movie plot. This is the reality on the front lines, right now.
So, how is this even possible? Well, the answer is a strategy called CEMA, which stands for Cyber-Electromagnetic Activities. The easiest way to think about it is combining two really powerful and visible weapons. You've got cyber operations, hacking, and you have electronic warfare, which is basically the art of controlling radio waves. You fuse those two together, and you have an absolutely devastating 1-2 punch in the digital world.
But to really get a handle on CEMA, we first have to map out the battlefield itself. I mean, what does this invisible front line even look like?
The battlefield is what's known as the electromagnetic spectrum, or the EMS. And the best analogy for it is to picture a massive system of invisible highways. All of your wireless data, your Wi-Fi at home, your phone's GPS, military radar, satellite communications, you name it, it all travels on these highways. So you can probably guess, if you can control the highways, you control pretty much everything that moves on them. Now, militaries have a term for fighting on these highways, electronic warfare. And it really just boils down to 3 key things. First, there's electronic attack. That's jamming or tricking the enemy's signals. Second, you have electronic protection, which is making sure your own signals are safe from those attacks. And third, there's electronic support. That's all about listening in, finding the enemy through their signals, and figuring out what they're going to do next. But here's the thing. This idea of fusing cyber and electronic warfare, it didn't just appear out of thin air. So why now? What was the big wake-up call? Well, turns out, a series of global events created the perfect storm that made CEMA an absolute necessity for modern militaries. The signs started popping up pretty fast. It began as a concept way back in 2000, with China developing its own doctrine called Integrated Network Electronic Warfare. Then came the real-world proof. In 2007, an Israeli airstrike in Syria allegedly used a cyber and EW combo to completely blind Syrian air defenses. A year after that, the Russo-Georgian War showed everyone just how vulnerable modern communications could be. And then, of course, there was Stuxnet, the digital weapon that proved a few lines of code could physically destroy critical infrastructure. So you see, all these events were pointing in the same direction, and they created 3 powerful drivers for CEMA. First, technology itself was converging. Every radio and radar was basically becoming a networked computer, which meant it was vulnerable to both hacking and jamming. Second, these conflicts proved that invisible, non-kinetic attacks without bombs, could be a total game changer. And finally, you had peer competition. Countries like China and Russia were already mastering these techniques, which meant everyone else had to adapt or risk being left totally defenseless. So, in response to all this, militaries all around the world started to fundamentally reorganize. They quickly realized they couldn't just keep doing things the old way. They had to build entirely new kinds of armies, digital armies, to fight on this new invisible battlefield. And in the West, 2 main models have kind of started to emerge. You've got the UK, which went for a really centralized top-down approach. They created a single cyber and electromagnetic command and just flat out declared this a formal domain of war, right up there with land, sea, and air. The US took a different route. It's more of a bottom-up, experimental approach, where different branches, like the Army, are creating brand new tactical units to put cyber and EW specialists literally side by side in the field, so they can figure this out as they go. And look, this is not just a Western trend. China took this integration concept even further, lumping all of its cyber, electronic, and space power into one massive unit called the Strategic Support Force. Russia, meanwhile, operationally merged its cyber and EW units on the battlefield under a doctrine they call information confrontation. And you have NATO trying to coordinate all its member nations to make sure they can all fight together in this new domain. Okay, so these new digital armies are getting organized, but what do they actually do? How do these integrated forces really fight on the digital frontline? All right, check this out. Here's a classic CEMA tactic, and it's called SIGINT herding. It's a perfect example of that 1-2 punch we talked about.
First, you launch a cyber attack that targets an adversary's weaker, less protected communication networks. This forces them to move all their important traffic onto their one remaining, heavily defended channel. They think they're safe for now, right? But what you've actually done is herded them into a trap. Because now, with all their communications in one single basket, you hit that final channel with a massive electronic attack, jam it completely, and just like that, they're deaf and blind.
And this change, it's profound. It fundamentally shifts what it means to be a soldier. As the former head of U.S. Special Operations Command put it, the most important person on the mission is no longer the operator kicking down the door, but the cyber operator, the person who can shape the battlefield before anyone even sets foot on it. The digital soldier is now every bit as critical as the one on the ground. So where does all of this go from here? Well, this invisible battlefield is about to get way, way more complex, and it's all thanks to one revolutionary technology. We are now entering the era of AI-powered warfare. So the big question is, how exactly does artificial intelligence change the game? Well, the truth is, the speed and complexity of cyber and electronic warfare are starting to outpace the ability of a human to react. AI isn't just a nice-to-have upgrade anymore. It is rapidly becoming a necessity to even compete. AI basically acts as a massive force multiplier in three key ways. On defense, it automates security. It can find and stop cyber attacks at machine speed. On offense, it powers what's called adaptive attack, letting smart algorithms hunt down and jam enemy signals way faster than any human operator could. But maybe most important of all, AI can fuse together enormous amounts of data, giving commanders something that looks a lot like a crystal ball. It helps them predict the enemy's next move so they can make better decisions much, much faster. And all of this brings us to one final, absolutely critical question. As this kind of warfare moves deeper and deeper into the invisible realm, as it becomes more powerful, more autonomous, who writes the rules? Who is responsible? How do we maintain control and accountability in a war that's fought at the speed of light? That is the challenge that lies ahead on this new invisible battlefield.